light is off.
Mary will introduce you.
Okay, perfect. Whatever.
Awesome.
However, I have to give Shirley her books.
Hello, everyone. I'm Vivian. I'd like to welcome you to the library on behalf of the Brown Bag, which has been running for many years, and I'm just starting to get involved with it. We are happy to have so many of you here today. Next month, we will be having Leah Lyon, a children's book illustrator, talking about her work. In December, we've got the Berkeley Path Wanderers coming to talk about their 40-year anniversary of leading walks all over Berkeley. And today we have two local authors to talk about their work, and Mary D'Elia will be introducing them.
Thank you. Wait a second. I've got to put something down here. Put that down. Put this up. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. What a great turnout. So as Vivian was mentioning, we've been doing the Brown Bag Speakers Forum for about 10 years now, and lots has changed over that course of time. And just quickly go into the fact that this is a collaboration between the Albany Library and the Albany YMCA, and Ronnie Davis, who was the manager of the library, used to collaborate with us, and she has retired, and so now Vivian is going to be doing it. The other thing that has changed is we have this fabulous PowerPoint that has no projector in view, and we have cameras in the back that you can't really see, but they can kind of see you. So it's a really wonderful upgrade, and I just want to thank the library and all those who are responsible for it for making those kinds of things happen. So today we are really pleased to have these two wonderful authors, and I'm just going to tell you a little bit about each of them. Shirley Streshinsky is the critically acclaimed author of 3 works of nonfiction and 4 historical novels. The historical novels are up here for you to take a look at, actually, later, if you'd like to. As a journalist and travel essayist, she has written extensively for Redbook, Glamour, Preservation, American Heritage, The American Scholar, and Condé Nast Traveler. She's been featured on NPR. She's the recipient of the Society of Magazine Writers Award for Excellence in the National Council for the Advancement of Education Writing Award. She's married to the late photojournalist Ted Streshinsky, and they have 3 grown children. She lives in Kensington, Berkeley, California, and she's a member of the Albany Y. Patricia Klaus received her PhD in modern British history from Stanford, where she specialized in women's studies, the history of marriage, and the study of war and literature. She's taught at Yale, Stanford, and the University of Virginia, and has published scholarly papers on the subject of women. Klaus lives with her husband and 2 sons on a farm in Sonoma County, California. She came all this way down to Berkeley, Albany, to be with us today. So would you please join me in giving them both a warm welcome?
I'll start. I want to thank you all for coming. I think I know just about everybody in this room, and I'm so happy to see you. I also want to thank the Albany Library, and especially the Albany YMCA, which is the sweetest little YMCA this side of the Mississippi, and probably the other side too. I think the people clapping are from my class. And I have to tell you, when I started writing on this book a year and 4 months ago, right, about, I told myself I was going to be able to do every week 2 things. And one thing was to go to this class called Easy Going, which isn't so easy. It's really, really a lot of exercise. And it's a lovely class. We all got to know each other. And as the end came, I would get these whispers. Are you finished yet? Are you done yet? And I have to say, well, not quite. And I also went to church at Northbrae on Sunday morning. Those were my 2 things I did through this whole period. And anyway, I have to tell you that we are almost done. And the almost is because the books aren't here today to sell, but they will be, I think, next week. They should be in the stores next week. So what we did, we brought postcards and we signed them. And if you want one and you want to go buy the book, you can put the postcard in as a bookmark. Okay, now for a little background for our love story. This is Oppenheimer country. Each of the four principal subjects in this book, Robert Oppenheimer, Ruth Sherman Tolman, Jean Tadlock, and Kitty Oppenheimer, lived in Berkeley and Kensington for a substantial period of time. And Robert's brother Frank lived right here in Albany for a while. It was after World War II. When Robert arrived at Cal in the late 20s to establish what was to become the most formidable school of theoretical physics in the country, he first lived in the university's faculty club, and then in an apartment north of campus at 2665 Shasta Road. Ruth Tolman, when she was still Ruth Sherman and a student at Cal, lived with her parents in a big house on Ashby above college, which I pass every time I visit friends who live near the Claremont Hotel. And Jean Tadlock went to the private Williams School. Is this better? Okay. Jean Tadlock went to the private Williams School, long empty now, but you pass it every time you drive up the Arlington. It's near San Fernando. Her family lived just above the school, high up on San Antonio Avenue, in one of those large and elegant homes. And when Robert married, he bought his wife Kitty a house at One Eagle Hill in Kensington, not very far from my house, where they lived until they left for Princeton and the Center for Advanced Studies. We know because the FBI already had a listening device in the house. They suspected Frank and Jackie were communists. Many years later, Frank and Jackie would go on to establish the Exploratorium. But on to Atomic Love Story. I thought I would begin reading from the end of the book, in a section we chose to call Outside the Timeline. It's where Patricia and I had some things we wanted to explain about our approach to the book. It begins. We were seduced by Robert Oppenheimer, intellectually, historically, even emotionally. Neither of us can remember exactly when this happened. We had never met him. He was long dead by the time we met each other. We do know that we began discussing an Oppenheimer book early in our friendship, and we have been friends now for more than 3 decades. We watched our own children grow up as Oppenheimer biographies began to be published, and we continued to read and talk about Robert and his role in what was certainly one of the most seminal events of our lifetimes. We cannot pinpoint the exact date when the subject of a book veered from Robert to his wife, Kitty. The biographies continued to be published, we continued to read them, and Kitty continued to be maligned. About his wife, Kitty, someone said, she could be very bewitching, but, and someone else said, fascinating, but not very nice. Then as we read all the hundreds of thousands of words, we found ourselves tantalized by other repeating exuberant phrases. About Jean Tadlock, Robert called her a lyrical, sensitive, yearning creature. Someone else said she was the one person in the room you would always remember. And about Ruth Tolman, the nature of whose relationship with Robert has been beset by rumors. His Aunt Hedwig called her Robert's best true friend. Ruth was 10 years older than Robert and the wife of another luminary in the world of physics, Richard Tolman of Caltech. Jean Tadlock was 10 years younger than Robert and his first great romantic love. Kitty became his first and only wife, and he was her 4th husband. We became convinced that these 3 women who occupied Robert's heart, his mind, and his adult life had a story worth telling. Not just because they were key to his life, but because they were representative of the intelligent, ambitious, educated women of that era. And they were in danger of being lost in the ever-growing shadow of the man who has come to symbolize the world's entry into the atomic age. One day, we simply knew that we wanted to rescue them from what seemed like historical oblivion. They took us on a voyage of discovery, these 3, Kitty and Ruth and Jean. There are some folks in this room today who know a lot more about Robert Oppenheimer and the atom bomb than we do. But some of you may not be entirely clear about who Robert was and why he is important. We figured it was no good to read about the women he loved if we didn't first offer an idea of what made him so attractive. So we decided to start the book with a few quotes, allowing some of the people who knew him best to try to explain his fascination. The heading of this early short section is a question. What is it about Robert? Paul Horgan, a Pulitzer Prize-winning author and close friend since boyhood, described him this way. He was the most brilliantly endowed intellectually of anybody I've ever known. He combined incredibly good wit and gaiety and high spirits. A superiority, but great charm with it, and great simplicity. I've rarely known anyone with more beautiful manners. Robert Serber, physicist and Oppenheimer's assistant and alter ego, elaborated. He was such an extraordinary man, his presence, and so verbal and so sensitive to other people and their feelings. There was just an aura around him. Frank Oppenheimer had a slightly different take. One of the most important characteristics of my brother involves the way in which he made people into heroes. He could like all manner of people, but in liking them, they became special and exceptional. And his own sense that they were special was transmitted both to the people involved and others. Anybody who struck him with their wisdom, talent, skill, decency, or devotion became, at least temporarily, a hero to him, to themselves, and to his friends. After that, the prologue begins. After Hiroshima and Nagasaki, after Robert Oppenheimer had been splashed on Time magazine's cover as the father of the atom bomb, after being excoriated during the McCarthy era as a communist dupe and probable traitor, humiliated by a bogus hearing, then resurrected by a government that attempted to find its conscience, J. Robert Oppenheimer, an elegant puzzle of a man, was left to the historians. Now I'm going to turn you over to the historian who plunged into this with me and did such a formidable job of bringing our three women out of the shadows. Patricia.
Thank you, Shirley. Now I've got to do, how's that? Can you hear me well enough? No? Okay, do I have to be closer? Okay, you can motion. Slow down, come closer. Okay. I want to start with one of the connections, or actually two connections that historians just love. Ruth Tolman's sister, Lily Margaret, and her cousin, Martha Chickering, were both very prominent with the Berkeley YWCA. Lily Margaret was the general secretary for years, traveled to Poland, around the United States, representing the Y. Martha Chickering traveled to Eastern Europe as well. I'm sure some of you know that the YWCA and YMCA were very active with European refugees right after World War I. Both of those women were working on those projects, but also was Boris Pash, who's going to appear in the book as Robert and Jean's bête noire. And he recurs in Robert's life at crucial times. He was working for the YMCA with Russian refugees in Berlin at about the same time as Ruth Tolman's sister and cousin were working with the women. I just love these connections, especially since this is the Y. Okay, I've got to come down here. When Shirley asked me to join her on the project, she had almost already decided that she wanted to write a biography of Kitty Oppenheimer. We ran almost immediately into the problems of sources. Although Kitty is included in every biography and most memoirs about Robert, all these snippets are based on interviews, personal recollections of people who generally did not like her. Other than the letters that she wrote to Joe Dallett and his mother, there are also very few letters written to Kitty or by Kitty. So we were faced with sort of a dearth of information. So then we played around with the idea of writing a novel. Certainly her life is more dramatic than many novels. Intriguing connections in Germany during the war, 4 husbands, flamboyant behavior. But Shirley must be given the credit here. She insisted that we pursue nonfiction. So we expanded the book to include the main women in Robert's life, 5, 6 of them, but that quickly became unwieldy. And as we read and researched more, we realized that there were 3 women who were central to his life. And then the research breakthroughs began to happen. By chance, I ran through a little mention in a biography of May Sarton about a letter to Jean Tadlock. It turns out that there are 150 plus letters in the New York Public Library in the Berg collection written by Jean to Jean to May, May to Ruth, and their circle of friends, discussing their teenage angst, their hopes, their dreams. These were impassioned, beautifully written letters, and suddenly Jean just came to life. Then we found that there were cousins still alive, there were nephews, there were nieces of some of the principal characters, and so we talked to them, and we found papers in other archives, the Library of Congress, Vassar. The Vassar connection became incredibly intriguing because we didn't realize that there was a connection between Ruth Tolman and Ruth Benedict, that one of Ruth Tolman's very closest friends was very close to Ruth Benedict, and letters about Ruth and to Ruth appear in the Ruth Benedict papers at Vassar. All the time we were doing the research, our feelings about Robert and Kitty would veer to one extreme to another. Robert was sympathetic and charming and brilliant. Robert was unfeeling and totally self-absorbed, even cruel at times. Kitty was fascinating but a bitch, cruel to Robert and to others. Kitty actually had a hard time living in Robert's shadow when he was preoccupied with grand politics, unsympathetic to her loneliness. Our feelings about Jean and Ruth were much less volatile. Our relationship with them was more one of discovery and ended up being one of great affection for them both. When they died, we both felt very sad and rather empty. Before I read some passages, 2 short passages from the book, I want to take you on a photographic journey. Cross your fingers, we hope. No, you don't have, you're fine, I think. Some of these photographs have headings, I hope, and so I won't need to comment. They come from some published sources, but many of them are from family archives and albums, and so they haven't been published before. Okay. Now, I think I should be able to do that.
Robert and his mother. Ella.
Oh, okay. This is. Do you want to read them, Shirley? Sure. The podium's not. I can't do anything about it.
No, it's okay.
Yes, I'm
Just
sorry.
Robert thinking about rocks. 1914. Viscering family. Kathy second on left, about 1900.
And who were the viscering?
Okay.
Oh, that, I'm sorry. It was Kitty's mother was a viscering, and Kathy, and she is large in the book. I don't know, that isn't.
That's her mother to the right. The one to the left is her sister, who becomes a filmmaker working for the Ministry of Propaganda during the war for the Germans. The 2 brothers both serve in the German army. One is a panzer commander, and the other was injured on the Eastern Front.
You might need to bring the microphone.
Oh, I'm sorry. The first far to the left is her younger sister, Hilda, who becomes an assistant filmmaker to a very famous director who was working for the Ministry of Propaganda for Goebbels, and did some very controversial films. Then there's Kathy. Then there's a sister who throws herself off a balcony during the war because of her son dying. And the 2 brothers, one was a panzer commander and one was injured on the Eastern Front. And that's her mother, known as the Dragon. And this is a family album of the Viscerings, and that's Kitty and her father. Kitty's a little girl. Her parents are on the ship over to America. An affectionate portrait of Kitty's mother and father, and a family portrait taken when Kitty was back on a visit to Germany. Ignore the other one.
Kitty, 1926, in Pennsylvania. This is a lovely story. You have to read the book to get the whole thing, but this was Kitty's first first husband. And he was little, we actually found his daughters. And I'm not going to tell you any more about that because this is really interesting.
This is his Harvard portrait. This is about the time that he met Kitty. They met in Paris, and there are other photographs of him with the beret, the pipe. Very dashing. He was also balding, which is why he wore the cap. And this is, when you read the book, this will mean more, but this is his family. Frank, the man, the only man, is Kitty's first husband, his wife, and his 2 daughters. That will be meaningful, but we can't give away the secret. Okay, go away. Okay.
This is Jean Tadlock, her high school graduation on the left, and that's about the time she was writing all of these wonderful, wonderful letters to May Sarton. And Jean on the right, at about the time she met Robert, and she was 10 years younger, as we said, but in many ways she was older and more mature. And she was in medical school. She became a doctor and a psychiatrist. These are more pictures of Jean, which Patricia found when you,
These were from John Tadlock, her nephew.
her nephew, and the brothers went, I think, in their basements and really looked hard for us for pictures. So we feel that we know Jean a bit.
Oh, I have to add this because I think it's such a wonderful other coincidence. John Tadlock, the niece of Jean's, her grandfather and his great-grandfather was a 3-time winner of the America's Cup. So we've been having this email exchange about the cup. Okay, go. Does it want to be back there? Oh, it wants to be there. Okay.
Kitty, passport photo, 1936,
While she's connected with Joe.
with Joe Dallatt, with her second husband, who was, that's Joe Dallatt, who died in Spain.
Yeah.
And she was trying to join him at the time.
Oh, okay.
Sorry?
Come closer here. She was, Joe had gone off to Spain and joined the Abraham Lincoln Brigade, and Kitty supposedly wanted to join him, and they wrote a whole collection of letters that are in the Bancroft, and that's just a stunning photograph. Oh, great.
Is it on? Yeah. Okay, good. Thank you. This is Ruth Tolman, who was married to Richard Tolman, who was really a very important man, a physicist at Caltech. And this is about the time they married.
No, actually, this isn't. This is, you would think looking at her that she was younger. This is actually seven years after they married, and she's in her 30s in that photograph.
Oh, right. That's okay.
Yeah, you wouldn't, she
Correct
looks
me.
24, but.
She does. And this is Ruth and Richard from the Caltech archives, I can see. And she didn't have children, but they had dogs that they loved. And of course, he was the brother of Edward Tolman, who some of you may know from Tolman Hall. And and Ruth went to Cal, and so there was a big family group here. Okay. Oh, another one of Ruth and Richard at Caltech, 1930. And this is Richard Tolman. I really like this picture of him for some reason, and I think it's in the Bancroft.
And I want you to know that we bought this photo, the rights to use it, and I don't know why we have the color on the bottom.
Okay. This is Robert and his horse named Crisis in New Mexico, and where they had a ranch, and where he became this physicist cowboy, which is one of his personas. And this is Kitty and Peter, and I think this may have been taken in Kensington, but he told me that it was the picture that was on his father's dresser. And this is sort of
This is my favorite picture, one of my favorites.
classic fatherhood for physicists, we call it. Ignore the baby. That's Peter. This is just the main gate picture at Los Alamos. It's where everybody went in. And Robert's ID pad photo. I rather like this photo of him.
This is actually when he was at the Berkeley Rad Lab before Los Alamos.
And this is Kitty. We couldn't find many really good pictures of Kitty. I don't know why, but this is one. And this is at Los Alamos. And Kitty again at Los Alamos. Everybody smoked all the time.
And Kitty would sit curled up like that when dignitaries would be visiting. So this is a very characteristic pose for her.
And this is a picture of Kitty and Robert. He devised this very elaborate game of tiddlywinks, which it took geniuses to understand, and that's what they seem to be playing. And this is Robert and Kitty and their little girl, Tony.
I like all these photos because some of them are just casual, but they're smiling at each other. And when you read the biographies about her, or the biographies of him that mention her, you wouldn't imagine their relationship one where they were just hanging out and smiling with one another. So it's sort of a different side of their relationship.
And this is Ruth, closer to the end of her life, 1954. She became a very well-known, important psychologist. And that's their beach at Hawks Nest Bay in St. John. Any of you been there? Well, I was on St. John once, but I couldn't get to the beach. And that's Tony when they were in Princeton, they spent a lot of time in the Caribbean in this house they built in St. John's. It seemed to be where they went to get out of everything.
Shirley loved this picture and we couldn't get it in the book.
Right.
So that's why it's here.
And this is another party. He certainly has skinny legs. My goodness.
They had a very active social life on St. John.
And this is Tony at Princeton with her horse. And Peter, 1950s.
I hope you can see he has a pipe in his mouth.
Does he?
Yes, yeah.
Huh. And this is Kitty, I'm sure at Princeton. And she has 2 books and a drink and a cigarette. 2 packs. And my feeling is she spent a lot of time just like this. And this is when Robert, Kitty, and Peter got, as some of you may know, Oppenheimer was given the Fermi Award, and they were trying to rehabilitate him after he had gone through a serious hearing. And this is kind of gone in the picture, but what I loved about it was Kitty is sitting at home reading, and
You're back to this one.
that one. And Robert is out with the physicist who had a wonderful time together. You can tell they just enjoyed themselves all the time. And they all spoke physics. And the man on the right is...
It's Charlie Larson and Robert
I mean, on
Bacher.
the left is...
Oh, that's, yeah,
Come on, guys. What's his name? The man on to the left of Robert, in the middle. Linus Pauling, that's who it is. Okay. There is also a wonderful Linus Pauling story in the book. It is Pauling, yes. And this is Kitty, where she was probably happiest, sailing.
When the person who was helping me with the PowerPoint, I had to do the slideshow for her to make sure it worked. When she saw that slide, her comment was, "What a wild journey it was." And I think it just captured, she has such a big smile. Okay, that's it
That's
for
it.
PowerPoint. I'm going to leave her up because I like that. Now that you can visualize the people in the book, I will start with a few pages about Robert and Jean, in which I'll talk about June 1943, a time when all three women were alive and their life intersected at varying degrees with Robert. The second will be from the late 1950s and give some insight into the marriage of Robert and Kitty. Okay. June 14th, 1943. At the beginning of the summer of 1943, Robert had to be in Berkeley to confer with Ernest Lawrence at the Berkeley Rad Lab. It was Robert's first trip back, and he had unfinished business. He had to hire someone for the project. He had not seen Jean before he left, and she had sent messages saying she needed to see him. No matter how many Army intelligence agents were tracking Robert, how miserable they could make his life, he was going to keep his promise this time. The light was fading by the time he finally left LeConte Hall. He walked across campus at his usual fast clip, heading for the streetcar that would take him into San Francisco. He would have allowed his mind to skim over the consequences, more of an exercise to keep his mind occupied, to block the uncertainty of how he would find her, Jean present or Jean absent, radiant or remorseful, perfect or flawed. The simple act of seeing her meant there would be hell to pay, he knew. Seldom without a cigarette, Robert would have stopped to light one, taking the opportunity to take a quick look around for the security agent he knew would be there. His signature pork pie hat made an easy target to tail. From the time he met Jean, the security agents would inform Lieutenant Colonel Boris Pash, he's our bête noire, Chief of Counterintelligence for the 9th Army Corps headquartered in San Francisco, and Pash would be delighted to inform General Groves, and the general would be livid. The idea would have been so disturbing that Robert would have shoved it into a compartment in his mind and slammed it shut. Neither would he have allowed himself to consider Kitty and Peter, left in Los Alamos. Kitty did not like it when he left. She could not know or control whom he would see at Berkeley, what he would do there. He took a last deep drag of the cigarette, flicked it away, then swung onto the Key System train that carried him over the Oakland Bay Bridge and into the city. He had celebrated his 29th birthday only a month before. Jean was his 39th, only a month before. Jean was 29. They had known each other, loved each other for 7 years now. Even when she couldn't marry him, he continued to love her. Perhaps he had not seen her before he left for Los Alamos, because he wasn't allowed to tell her why he was leaving, or where he was going, or especially what he was doing. Jean, who believed above all else in the sanctity of life. It was dark by the time the train rattled over the lower level of the Bay Bridge. The FBI would have a file on Jean, on the two of them. What could they possibly know about their relationship? What could anyone know? On that June evening in 1943, he knew that an agent would be lurking somewhere near her in the terminal where she would be waiting for him. The FBI report reads, Oppenheimer, arriving at 9:45 p.m., rushed to meet a young lady whom he kissed, and they walked away arm in arm. They entered a 1935 green Plymouth coupe, and the young lady drove. The car's registered to Jean Tadlock. Height, 5'7", weight, 129 pounds, hair, long dark, appearance, slim, attractive. She was smiling, not hurting, and Robert could see that, but glowing, happy. The Jean that kept him coming back. He smiled as she fit into his arms and kissed him. He would have studied her with that intensity that so unsettled others, the blue eyes riveted as if he could study the very synapses of her brain. She slipped her arm into his and led him to the roadster. She drove east along the Embarcadero, scene of much of the labor unrest she had imported with such righteous indignation in the Western worker, then turned north and west on Broadway. She had decided where they would eat, a shabby place not far from her apartment on Telegraph Hill. An agent waited outside where he could watch the door. He would report. Drove to 787 Broadway at 10 p.m., cheap-type bar, cafe, and dance hall operated by Mexicans. Had few drinks, something to eat. Robert would later say that they did not talk about communism. It was always an on-again, off-again thing with her. He would explain. Nor did they talk about where he was and where he was doing and what he was doing. Peter would have been mentioned, but probably not Kitty. Perhaps Jean told him that her brother was an Army doctor now at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, studying infectious diseases. Or they talked about Churchill, who was in Washington at that moment with Roosevelt. Maybe they spoke of the Europe both remembered from what now seemed long ago. The Allies were making progress in Tunisia. The tide seemed to be turning. Yet there was no doubt that this war was a fight for survival. What Jean needed to tell him was that she loved him. He needed to know that it didn't matter if he had married, had started his family, had moved ever more deeply into the world of science. What mattered to her was that he knew she had never stopped loving him. Perhaps she told him at the cafe, or maybe it was later when they went to her apartment on Telegraph Hill, where a car with 2 agents sat watching. The report reads that the couple went to 1405 Montgomery, where Jean lived on the top floor. At 11:30 p.m., the lights in the above-mentioned apartment were extinguished. The relationship of Oppenheimer and Jean Tadlock appeared to be very affectionate and intimate. Perhaps she waited to tell him when they finally turned out the lights. They may have made love or simply held each other for the night. They had to have known it would be their last time together for a long while. The next morning, they left in her roadster. She kissed him goodbye at the East Bay terminal, and he caught a streetcar back to Berkeley campus and his meetings. They made plans to meet later that day at the airline office in downtown San Francisco. Jean drove on to the hospital. That afternoon, the FBI picked up the surveillance. Tadlock arrived on foot, and Oppenheimer rushed to meet her. They appeared very affectionate and walked to her car nearby. Then they went to Kit Carson's Grill. After dinner, she drove. Oh, this isn't the report, this is us. After dinner, she drove down the peninsula to the airport. Perhaps he kissed her goodbye before they left the car, mindful that he was meeting a colleague. She watched him walk onto the tarmac and board the plane, first to Los Angeles, then to Los Alamos and his other life. Within 2 weeks, Lieutenant Colonel Boris Pash sent a memo to the Pentagon recommending that Dr. Oppenheimer be denied a security clearance and be fired as scientific director of the Los Alamos Laboratory, citing, among other things, his overnight tryst with Jean Tadlock, identified as his mistress and a known communist. The general was livid, but he did not fire Robert. By now, Groves felt that the success of his mission depended on this man. But there was a limit to his patience and to how long he could call off the hounds of the Counterintelligence Corps. Military intelligence immediately requested that the FBI conduct an investigation of Jean and recommended installation of technical surveillance on the residency of Jean Tadlock for the purpose of determining the identity of espionage agents within the Comintern apparatus for the further purpose of protecting secret information regarding this nation's war effort. Her phone was tapped, informers questioned. So I'm now going to totally shift gears, and the second reading is occurs in about 1955, and it's based on a story by Lynn Margulis, who is one of the most, or was one of the most important evolutionary biologists and professor at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. And she wrote an account of a Sunday visit with the Oppenheimer family. She gave a copy of the then unpublished essay to Freeman Dyson, who actually sent it to me. In 2007, she published the article in her book, Luminous Fishes. Lynn Alexander would marry Carl Sagan 3 years later. After 8 years, they would divorce, and she would marry Thomas Margulis. In 1999, she was presented the National Medal of Science by President Clinton. During spring break of 1955, Lynn Alexander, a 16-year-old at the University of Chicago, had driven across the country with her boyfriend, fellow student Carl Sagan, to his New Jersey hometown. Worried that his mother would not approve the two of them traveling together, he dropped Lynn off at an inn in Princeton. Now, at this point, Lynn had seen the interview that Oppenheimer does with Edward R. Murrow on television, and she decided that spontaneously she'd like to pay a visit unannounced to Dr. Oppenheimer. She wrote how she, with dark eyes, dark hair, and a wide, engaging smile like a young Kitty Oppenheimer, had walked up Olden Lane and was approaching the front door when she ran into the family on their way into town. She introduced herself to Robert and told him that she was a science student from the University of Chicago. He invited her to come with them, and she had piled into the Cadillac convertible in the back seat with Tony and Peter. At some point, Peter, almost 14 himself, had said to her, "You must be smart." Lynn would write that she didn't know how to answer, so she said nothing. But But Kitty spoke up, speaking slowly to distinctly, and told her that Peter had just published his first article, a television column in the university paper, with his byline, Kitty added. Lynn wondered, quote, if Dr. O felt as oppressed by his wife as I did. End quote. By the time they arrived in downtown Princeton, it was clear that Kitty objected to this bright young stranger joining their outing. And yet, when Lynn had a chance to speak with Robert about the Murrow interview, he had smiled and, quote, those eyes looking directly at me, he asked warmly if I would like to come back to their home again. Kitty overheard and grimaced. Would I be disturbing you? Lynn said as she asked. Kitty answered sharply, with a purposely unmistakable tension in her voice. Quite frankly, you'd be welcome only if you stay a little while. This is the only chance we have to be with the children, isn't it, Robert, dear? Robert said so softly his wife didn't hear, oh, do come home with us. I have something to show you. Lynn described Peter as being sheepishly buried in the Sunday papers, hunkering down in the back seat with a sullen Tony, the 10-year-old daughter. Lynn did go back to Olden Manor with them, and Robert showed her the famous painting in the living room, then settled down with the Sunday papers, one with an article on the Oppenheimers, in which Kitty was described as petite, chic, witty, tense, and vivacious, and the other containing Peter's first column. When Robert handed this paper to Lynn to read, Kitty muttered, unfair, and asked rather fiercely to see it first. Robert, Lynn wrote, chided Kitty for not being very entertaining. Lynn said, you'd rather entertain your children, I'm sure. Kitty answered bluntly, we will, after you leave. In Lynn's account, Robert said to her, oh no, do stay and eat with us. He invited me with real feeling in his voice. He seemed sincerely to want me to stay. Lynn was flattered, and it was hard to say no, she admitted. But when she rose to leave, Mrs. Oppenheimer flashed him a triumphant smile, and then, furtively glancing at his tight-lipped wife, he checked that she wasn't looking and smiled warmly, deeply. He meant it. I tingled with pleasure. He shook my hand, gazed affectionately at me, then blankly at the street, with melancholy, gleaming blue eyes. Robert, caught in the act of intellectual seduction. After that, Alexander wrote that she wandered down Olden Lane on her way to the inn, quote, drunk with Dr. O and sense of spring in a dream, wondering about my foray into the Oppenheimer family. I was certain that although Mrs. O still resided with him, she had long since deserted him. He had wanted me to stay. I had permitted to catch a glimpse, to feel the intellectual sex appeal that had so attracted physicists to Los Alamos in 1943. She continues, he seemed like an aging lion staggering with a broken spirit. With that, this bright 16-year-old wondered if he had ever thought of Jean Tadlock, quote, or if he had ever enjoyed a relationship of higher quality, a special plane of intimacy. Lynn wrote with the same emotional hyperbole of the adolescent Jean, yearning for a depth of love she had not yet experienced. Her account of the afternoon was no doubt factually true, yet she was not mature enough to read the other possibilities, that Robert was taunting his wife and ignoring his children, that he was encouraging her to spite his wife, in spite of the fact that his wife had said she considered the girl to be an interloper. This episode offers a disturbing glimpse into the dynamics of the Oppenheimer ménage in the wake of the hearing, that 1954. Alexander follows a familiar script about Kitty. She was rude, a bitch. She does not fault Robert as an intellectual seducer, but that was a role he had time and again assumed with both men and women. As his close friend and Berkeley professor Harold Shirley once described, his mere physical appearance, his voice, and his manners made people fall in love with him, male, female, almost everybody. Shirley and I have discussed and sometimes disagreed about what this incident tells us about the Oppenheimers' relationship. Was Kitty looking forward to spending the day with her husband and son and was rightfully irritated? Or did the story reveal the wicked sense of humor, to borrow an Oppenheimer's friend description, that Kitty and Robert shared, and that they used almost as a secret language to exclude other people. This has been a great part of the challenge of writing this book. We will never know, but we have had a great time trying to reassemble the lives of these fascinating people.
Questions? Yes?
I have a Oppenheimer story in the late 30s. My professor at Cal, Gerard Rolfson, was a friend of Opie, and he and his current girlfriend at the time visited his house, which was very close to the top of Grizzly Peak. One night, 1 a.m., there was a knock on the door, and it was a girl that Opie had taken to his house before at the party. And she said that she and Opie were necking up on the top of Grizzly Peak. He walked away into another channel, and he went down to Cal, and so Rolfson had to go and drive the car back and get her back. That's a story about Girl Zero.
Yeah, we actually came upon that story. And I don't know why we didn't include it particularly, because
Was this about Melba Phillips?
it was Melba.
Melba Phillips?
Your mic may not be on, Shirley,
Oh.
or you can use the other one. The other one seems to be working.
Is
How
this
do I
one
turn
working?
it on here?
I don't know, actually.
Well, I can get up.
Dan's here, he's gonna.
Want me to just use this one? I can get up. Is that working? It was.
Surely that one worked. Here.
Well, I'll just get up.
Okay. Am I working? I'm working.
You're working?
Do you want me to stand and you use this one?
It's okay. It's okay. It was Melba Phillips, who was a famous physicist, and the story never really got filled out. But all we know is that somehow it got into the papers, and it was published in Europe, and his brother Frank saw it, and it was just that the headline was "Absent-minded Professor Leaves Girl," but they were parked up on Skyline, and somehow he left her there, and he ended up, according to what we knew, home. We didn't know that there was another person involved, but I'm not surprised. That was a period when he was dating. He had not met Jean. He was mainly spending time with his co-workers. And you probably know more about that than I do if you have the, yeah. Anything else?
I'd like to ask a question about how you collaborate to write a book together. I mean, it just seems incredible to me that two people can write together.
Well, do you want to know how we did collaborate? I'll start, and then Patricia can move in. But
Everybody else is interested.
okay, we had both done a lot of research. I had done research on this, but I knew I really didn't know how to research deeply, and I knew Patricia did. And we, as I said, we're old friends, and we've talked about books all the time. So what we did was we did some research together. I went off to spend a summer at the Library of Congress. Patricia went off in several directions, meeting people, following through. We talked about this a lot. We talked not just on the phone, but at a brew pub in Larkspur. Patricia lives in Petaluma, and I live in Kensington, and we met halfway at this brew pub, which got to know us pretty well, I think. And we talked it all through. We talked what we thought it would be, and we disagreed sometimes, but we came out with what we felt had happened. And the reason, I had done a number of historical novels, and they're being reissued, by the way. what I didn't like about it was I could take freedom with facts, but I was the only one who knew what the freedom was. And I really felt I had done a biography of Audubon in which I couldn't do that. So I really felt it was more satisfying to do nonfiction. And Patricia held me to it. She really did.
What is your source? What is your source?
Yeah. I would write something slightly off the, or she says, what is your source for that? But I have to say, near the end of it, I was asking her, what is your source for that? But really, we talked it through, and then I wrote a first draft and sent it to Patricia, and she went through and made suggestions and things that she disagreed about. We talked and made changes, and that went on for, is it 31 chapters?
31 chapters?
31 chapters worth. And it actually worked out just fine.
I don't know. Can you hear me on this? Yeah. Okay. One of the things that made it easier is that Shirley has collaborated with her daughter Maria, who's standing in the back, on several occasions, and I've collaborated with my son. So we both sort of had the experience of how to work with someone whom we hold very dearly and don't want to offend. And I think that helped us amazingly. We sort of always knew the boundaries of what we could say or not say, and sometimes we would push too much, and then we'd back off, and the pusher would then say, gosh, I'm sorry I pushed. And
I should say my daughter is standing back here, and there were times when she stepped in and said, okay, ladies, we're going to sit down. And we sat down at her house and worked when we needed to work fast, and she guided us through. So thank you, Maria. Yes?
Yeah, I was wondering, all these illustrious people, did they ever discuss the implications of nuclear in the world and how it changed the world and how it, how Fukushima and everything? Like, did they
All
ever
the
talk
time.
about that?
All the time. And really, when you think of it, that's why Robert Oppenheimer is so fascinating. He has become the symbol of what happened at Los Alamos and what is still over our heads today. I don't think a week goes by that I don't hear some implication of the atom bomb and what it meant to all of us. And he's a really complex and fascinating character. And we haven't talked so much. We've talked a lot about him here, but really, the women. There's a whole bigger story here. These were women of my mother's and a lot of grandmothers' period. They were bright women who had access to education and who were from homes where learning was very important. And they all wanted to be, actually they all wanted to be doctors, and two of them were. Jean Tadlock became a medical doctor and a psychiatrist. Ruth became, as we said, a doctor of psychology at Berkeley under her brother-in-law, actually, although she lived in Pasadena. And Kitty desperately wanted to have a PhD and to be like all the rest of them, and she kept getting married. So, and it, that's another thing, the need for a man, because a lot of women who got PhDs did not go on and get married. That was part of it. And actually, lesbianism is a major theme here, too, among the women.
One other little addition is that what Ruth Tolman ended up working on was she became a clinical psychologist and was one of the in the forefront of her field. And she was especially interested in dealing with soldiers that returned with shell shock and psychological disturbances from World War II. And she worked down in the VA hospital in Los Angeles and trained the psychologists who would then do clinical work, which was a new thing. Usually you had to be a doctor to do clinical work, a medical doctor. So she was dealing with some of the same problems that we're dealing with right now that have just made one of the lead articles in the New Yorker. So I find it fascinating that she was so far ahead of her time in analyzing a problem and trying to do something about it.
All the more reason that we felt it important to pull these women out from the shadows for themselves and for the rest of us. June?
I just want a clarification. Lynn Alexander you were talking about, that was Lynn Alexander, Sagan, Margulis.
Yes.
Okay.
Very famous.
I had met her.
Did you?
Yeah, in my ballet class.
Did she live here?
No, she had come for her daughter's graduation. Daughter was getting a PhD or master's or something in Compton and Cal. And so she was visiting, and daughter took classes at the same studio and class that, and she brought her mother, and her mother took the class with us. And
Yeah.
I had spoken to her after. She looked so like, what am I doing here, you know? And I felt sorry for her. I thought she was like about my age. So I think,
Yeah.
you know, I think I know nothing to her, you know. You're not as much as you. And she said, but you're not fat.
Well, she was quite a girl. Robert? Yes. Was it Lawrence?
He wasn't
No.
He was up at the, oh. It wasn't the Lawrence Berkeley Laboratory then. It was where Lawrence worked. It was the RAD lab.
Barbara? Bob?
Same place,
But what
But
was
it-
it called then? Do you know?
UC Radiation Lab.
Okay. Yeah. But it was in LeConte. A lot of the work was in LeConte Hall. Yeah. Yes?
Did you end up with a more sympathetic feeling about Kitty when you got done with the research?
That's yours. Are we more sympathetic to Kitty?
You know, I think I am at the end because, and part of it is the pictures. I look at her in that picture and I see so much life and vitality in her. And she was one of these people who just never could grasp her dream. You know, she wanted to be important, she wanted to be famous, she wanted to be a doctor, but she wasn't able to do it because she always had to have a man. And she had to have a man who had something exceptional about him. And we chose Oppenheimer, she was always going to be in his shadow. So I do feel sympathetic. I think when you read some of the really nasty passages, you think someone should have, you know.
Well, you know, this is
But
another.
I try, but yeah, go ahead. Sorry, sure.
This is another big thing because we started looking at all the biographies, and what everybody had about Kitty came from essentially two sources of women who had good reason not to like her. And that seemed really unfair. So I decided initially, before I said, help Patricia, I decided that I was going to redeem her. And I was going to find all these good things about her, and I kept finding not good things. And but I hope we've made her more understandable. And, you know, our difference in that Lynn Margulis thing is I think Patricia thinks maybe that Robert and Kitty were playing off of each other and being kind of...
Yeah, I think that they had, one of their friends, as I said, described them having this cruel sense of humor. I think in some ways over the years they had this kind of play back and forth that to outsiders seemed horrific, but to them was just their pattern that they had developed in all the years of their marriage. That's one interpretation.
Well,
Shirley
my
has-
interpretation was that this girl was just very straight. She was going to go in there and draw all these inferences, and she was an interloper. I mean, she didn't have an appointment with them. He happened to love scientists, young scientists, male or female, and I think she was clearly this very bright girl. I think Peter Oppenheimer is someone people don't write about very much because he is still living. I've corresponded with him for a number of years. The people around the Oppenheimers protected him. He lives in New Mexico. He left and went to New Mexico. And I think all of us, including the two of us, feel we don't want to impinge on his life. But I don't know if he finished high school. He and his mother did not get along, and he eventually just took off and went back to the mountains. And my feeling was, I felt sad for him in this. You know, this smart girl shows up, and he says, "You must be very smart," and then he's reading the comics in the back. And she writes this, I don't know, you can see why she went far. I mean, she didn't hold back. But I was rather sympathetic to Kitty after that interlude. I don't know how the rest of you felt, but anyway. Someone else?
Well, I was just going to comment that it sounds a little bit like Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf? We've got two very bright people, and who is to expect that these two bright people that have conflicting interests are going to have a sweet relationship like
Yeah.
some of us would like to have, you know?
Well, she also didn't talk. I think physicists have a wonderful time together. They know all of this, but their wives don't always know it all. And many wives, it's just fine. They go on and do their own wonderful things. But I think Kitty wanted to be Robert. That's my take. Any others?
We have time for one more question.
One more question. Yeah? I don't want to tell you. I really don't. I don't know.
It would have been Pauling, not Oppenheimer. I don't think he was ever, to my knowledge, he did a lot of talking about peace, but he was never, it's complicated, but he was actually never anti using nuclear weapons, and it was Pauling who did all the demonstrating.
Can I say just one more thing? We, as I said, the books will be out, and we are going to be speaking again at Mrs. Dalloway's on the 26th. And they promise they will have books there. But if you want to just get a book on your own, all we could do was get some postcards. We sign the back. If you want to use them for a bookmark and buy your own book, that's fine. And our publisher, Turner Publishing, has reissued 5 of my books? 5. A biography I did of Audubon and 4 historical novels. So if any of you, they should also, they're in the bookstores now, I think. Well, they may not be in the bookstores. You have to ask for them or order them. Okay?
Thank you so much for coming. One more round of applause for our guests. Thank you. And this is for you from the library and from the... Thank you. That was great.